Well, folks, I'm so happy you're here. Go ahead and grab yourself a seat. Welcome to the Center for Spiritual Living. We have a number of people at a spiritual meditation retreat this weekend, so we have about 30 people that are there in Durham, but I'm certainly glad that you are here. Kevin, it's always good to see you. Yes, Donna, it's good to see you, even more so.
And the reading for today is by Ernest Holmes. He says, "Here we may meet difficulties, uncertainties, and doubts, barriers walling our passage, but we must not be discouraged when so confronted. We must climb over the rocks of unbelief, pass around the barriers of doubt, and plunge into the stream with faith. The stream will ever widen, the barriers will gradually disappear. Though we walk through the plains and valleys of indecision and doubt, the streams will still carry us back to the ocean of our being." And so it is.
Well, they tell us that flying is safe, much faster than driving a car, but still scares people. I don't know if it scares you, but it scares a lot of people. I read this week that 27% of the people, of the American people, are somewhat afraid of flying. Some are not afraid of flying so much, but they're afraid of crashing. And then a number of people are just afraid of being in such a small enclosed space with no escape. I remember David Bowie back in the 70s had a situation, and after that he started to opt for trains and boats. That may have changed afterwards, but that went on for at least a decade. Kate Winslet, you know her, Titanic fame and other things too. But she and her husband, they have children, and so when they travel by plane, they always travel separately. So if something happened to one plane, then the kids still have a parent. If you have trouble with flying, there's a lot of things you can do that might help. Some people have used medication and it's worked well. Breathing exercises can help. Hypnotherapy, psychotherapy. From what I read this week, controlled exposure can help. I was interested when I read some pilots giving advice, because some of these people had been flying for a number of years. And I'll mention two or three of those. On British Airways, the pilot announced as they entered into some turbulence, he announced over the PA, "Squeeze those bottoms, squeeze those bottoms." And that helped quite a bit. And you may wonder why. Of course, it's a distraction technique. And another pilot suggested that you carry on a notebook and a pen and you just start writing your name, and you write your name over and over and over and over. And they said that worked quite well. And again, it's a distraction technique. If you write with your opposite hand, it could even help more. And then a third pilot suggested that you suck on a straw. And the idea is biologically based, because if you're restricting the air coming into your lungs, then you're not going to hyperventilate, and so it can keep you more calm probably than the other way around. All of this is about fear, and fear is basically about loss. Fear is always about loss, about what if I lose something? And so the bottom line is it often comes down to change. If you're on an airplane and you're concerned about it, it may be because you're thinking, I'm alive, and that may change at any moment, and so I don't like being on this airplane. And so it deals with change. And of course, when I'm talking about flying, I'm not talking about really just flying in an airplane, but I'm talking about living an exciting life, that kind of flying. And so we're talking about living life or flying with courage. And courage, the word itself comes from a French word, and it means heart. And so for someone to be courageous, it means the person is full of heart. in their thinking, in their feeling, and they respond fully to life with everything that they've got. And so that sounds a lot like flying through life to me. Sometimes we confuse being brave and being courageous. Being brave means something happens. You don't have time to think about it. You risk your life to save somebody else, risking your own life. But you weren't really afraid because you didn't really have time to think about it. That's brave. But courageous is when we do have time to think about it. We know what could happen, and yet we choose to do the courageous thing anyway. We take a stand and we stick with it. It means we live from our values. We live from the stand that we're taking. And so it's sort of a longer kind of thing. To me, it seems like it would be easier almost to be brave than courageous, because courageous means you recognize the fear and you do it anyway because of what you believe. But it all comes down to fear. It comes down to a fear of loss. It comes down to a fear of change. It's like if you get a new pair of shoes and you wear the new pair of shoes, and after a short time you get blisters and it hurts, and you think to yourself, I really miss my old shoes. And the new shoes just don't feel quite right. And that's often how we feel when change happens. It doesn't feel quite right. Things feel a little bit out of sort, a little bit out of kilter, and so it just feels strange. And we may long for that old pair of shoes and want it to be the way it used to be. You can think about any kind of situation. You can think about an empty nest. You can think about a new baby, a lost love, or a big move from one house to another, or you can think of a job loss. All of those things push our buttons when it comes to change. And they push buttons even if it happens to be a change that we wanted to happen. Even then, it still can shake us up just a little bit. Now, I'm not a professional mountain climber, but I had a friend who was, and he told me one of the most important things about climbing a mountain was packing properly. Because you have to be concerned about the weight. You don't want to carry heavy, heavy things if you're climbing the side of a mountain. And so it's important to think about the tools that you'll need. And so a lantern can give you light. Gloves can give you protection. A lantern can provide the light. A sleeping bag can keep you warm. And if you lose your footing, an axe can save your life. But you do have to be careful about, does it weigh too much? And the same thing absolutely is true when we face change in life. We want to pack well, but pack lightly. And we want to make sure that we have the right kind of tools. All of us in this room have a philosophy for life. And so it's not a question, do you have a philosophy? Because we all do. The real question is, how well does your philosophy work? Especially, how well does it work when change takes place? Because that's especially when you need to know what you really believe, what you really think, and what assumptions you really have. And you want to be able to think about those before the big change happens so you're ready when it does happen. And so having tools, it's important. If something happened to you in your 20s, maybe it was really hard to get through it. But at 30, maybe you do a better job, and at 40, you even do a better job. And the reason isn't simply because you're older, but it's because you have more tools. And so that's why it's important to always be learning something, always be learning a new technique, a new way, because you never know what's going to happen in life, and that can help you absolutely be ready. Thoreau said, the best philosophies solve problems not only theoretically, but practically speaking. And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about being able to fly with courage, because most of us have lived long enough to know that life can get messy sometimes. And when it gets messy, you need to be able to have some tools you can pull out, or it can cause some problems. And I wish I could say, buy this book and you'll have courage. I wish I could say, here's the equation for courage and now you don't have to be concerned about it. But courage is more complex than that. In fact, life is more complex than sometimes we might imagine. And so there's no simple recipe for courage. Now, I've been thinking over the last 2-3 weeks about change and loss and how do you deal with things like that. And so I've thought about at least 5 principles, and I want to share those with you. These are helpful to me, and maybe they will be to you. Maybe right now your life is quite stable, but you still want to make note of these because tomorrow it could be different. Change could be on the horizon, and so you want to be ready for it, just like I do. So 5 principles. Here's the first one. The first one is that change doesn't often announce itself. Now, sometimes it does, but most of the time, probably not. You don't get a call making an appointment because change is coming. Often it just happens. And it's sort of like, Mark, when you and I were young, we were playing tag. And it's sort of like playing tag back in those days. And so I might be counting, or Mark might be counting, and we're about to begin the game. And then I hear him say something like, "Here I come, ready or not." And that's what change might say to you. Here I come, ready or not. And once change tags you, then you're it. And you've got to make sense and decide exactly what you're going to do. And so you've got to be ready. And you've got to be open to anything, and you've got to be at the same time attached to nothing. And so the principle, the first one, change often does not announce itself. It just shows up. Principle 2, life is chaotic. Now, maybe you haven't noticed that, but I suspect you have. Life can be chaotic. You and I are on the front lines. And so life is all about divine chaos. And so we have to take a breath, and we have to get ready, and we have to ride the horse to the best of our ability, especially when it announces itself and it says, "Here I am, ready or not." Change is like a gift. And we're thinking about gifts this time of the year. Change is like a gift, and you open the gift, and it's an open puzzle. It's not put together, it's just all jumbled up. And your job is to figure out how to put this puzzle together. And you may not even be sure you can put it together. You may not know in your life how the circumstances will play out exactly. You don't know for sure what's going to happen. And you may even look in your lap and you may say to yourself, "How did this damn puzzle get in my lap?" And yet there it is. And so you've got to make some kind of decision because you've been tagged by change. Now, it doesn't happen just to the person sitting next to you. It happens to you and me and everybody else because life is greatly about change. I thought about, as I was thinking about this talk, yesterday I was sitting in a chair and I noticed a deck of cards. And the deck of cards had been shuffled. And I thought, now that is really a symbol of chaos. And I had my iPhone with me. And I compared the two, and I thought the iPhone is a symbol of order, precision. But the cards, it's all about chaos. And then I thought, and you wonder, what am I thinking about? These are the kind of things I think about. So I'm comparing the two things, thinking about this talk. And I think, well, if I took those cards and just threw them in the floor, would they be more or less chaotic? And the answer would be they would probably be about the same, still chaotic. Now, if I slam my phone down, the phone might break, and it would really be disordered at that point. But I could take those cards and give me at least 5 minutes, and I could probably bring those cards into order and get rid of the chaos. With the phone, not so much. And then I thought about us as human beings. You and I are like that deck of cards because you have enormous potential to deal with chaos and to order your own life and to bring everything together. So even today, if things look just crazy, Well, give yourself a few days and it might not look crazy at all, because you do have that gift. You have the ability to look at things and to deal with it in a totally different way. You can adapt to the changes that happen in your life. And I suppose, one thing that really helps is just recognizing life is chaotic. Because that may sound like bad news, but if you recognize life is chaotic, then when life shows up chaotic, it doesn't really disturb you quite as much as if you thought there was no chaos at all. So just recognizing it and making it okay can make a big difference. And then you can take the chaos and you can actually begin to tell a brand new story, and it becomes something brand new in your life. I'm sure all of us know this, but you can't really control the cards that you're dealt. But you can absolutely control how you play the cards you get. And so you and I want to play those cards with as much dignity as we possibly can. It's important to do. And if we do it with some mindfulness, we can actually reorganize it, and we can even create a whole new life for ourselves out of what seemed to be chaos in the beginning. Does that make sense to you? But it may feel a little weird. It may feel a little uncomfortable, just like new shoes. And so it takes some time, but just recognizing that can help. Kenny Rogers had 5 number 1 songs. And I guess his biggest hit was The Gambler. And I think it came out in 19... Yeah, Michael's going to play that for us perhaps later. And I think it came out in 1980. And most of you would remember the song probably, but the gambler tells the narrator that he can tell that he's down on his luck. He's out of aces. And he can tell that by the look in his eyes. And he said, but for a swig of that whiskey, I'll give you some advice. And so he took the drink and then he gave the advice. And here's the advice. You got to know when to hold them, and you got to know when to fold them. You got to know when to walk away, and you got to know when to run. You never count your money when you're sitting at the table. There'll be time enough for counting once the dealing's done. That's good advice. Because you see, life is like a card game. You can't control the cards you get, but once you get your hand, you want to take a look and play it to the very best of your ability. Oh, and the thing that you want to make sure you don't do is you don't want to surrender your leadership. Because sometimes when change hits us, when loss hits us, we surrender our leadership to anything we see around us. And so we don't want to surrender our leadership to what other people might think. We don't want to surrender leadership to how other people might judge the situation. We don't want to surrender our leadership to the expectations of other people. We don't want to give up our personal dream. We don't want to give up our personal desire. We don't want to take the book of our life and hand to somebody else and say, you write the script of my life, please. Because you want to retain the right to write your own script. And change sometimes can frighten us so much that we just throw the script away and we want someone else to enter in and take care of us. So you don't want to surrender your leadership to culture. You don't want to surrender your leadership to family. And you don't even want to surrender your leadership to friends. You want to live your life with authenticity no matter what happens. And so you look at the hand that you've been dealt and you play it to the best of your ability. But life is chaotic. Principle 3. Principle 3 is take a look at life from a 30,000-foot perspective. What I mean by that is look at change from a higher place. Look at change from a higher elevation. Kierkegaard said life can only be understood backwards, but must be lived forwards. I'll tell you what change will do to you and me. it will grab a hold of us, especially if it's unannounced, and it will suck you into a small box. And you were not made to live in a small box. You need room to move. You need room to dream. And so you don't want to get stuck in the change. If you thought of change as a pool of water, you don't want to immerse yourself in the pool of water. Even though it's calling out to you, even though it's making a lot of noise, you want to rise above the change so you can get the panoramic view. Now that is good advice. But that's even better than the gambler's advice. You want to get the big view and be above it so you can see what you would like to do. And when you pull back and you get the big perspective, the weird thing that you may find is that in one way or the other, lots of things begin to fit together. But if you're in the box and you're focused entirely on the change and you're stuck in the change, you'll never see the connections. So you have to see the big picture. And when you do that, you may not be stuck anymore. You may not even be disillusioned anymore. And that's one of your great powers. It's one of your greatest powers, to be able to take perspective. I can look at it one direction, but I can go over and rise up and look at it from another direction, and everything's quite different. Perspective. And change is a great time to do that. Change is a great time to actively seek out a new kind of perspective that you're looking for. I read this week that this quote, I never heard a quote before that I remember. It said, "To be everywhere is to be nowhere." To be everywhere is to be nowhere. And so you do want to focus. And so it's sort of like you want to focus on the donut, but you don't want to focus on the whole. So you want to rise up, and you don't want to become so nebulous that you just float away. But you don't want to be stuck in the hole of the donut. And so you rise up and you begin to see what might be helpful, and you place your focus there. And that absolutely changes everything. So you never want to surrender your leadership to people, but you never want to surrender your leadership to circumstances, because you are much larger than any circumstance that could ever happen in your life. Principle 4. I've got 5. Principle 4. Nothing ever truly begins or ends. The way we think it's sort of as a dichotomy. We think up and down. We think start and stop. And because of that, we tend to chunk life and we jump from one conclusion to another. But life is a larger flow than anything else. So change is hard because we think and stops and starts. And sometimes we spend so much energy grieving over something that's lost without realizing that what we're grieving has actually been replaced, but in a different form, and it's right there in front of us. And so a lot of what I'm saying today says life is large. Life is wonderful. Life is vast. A friend of mine went to India several years ago, and he was watching these people not knit rugs. What would it be? They're weave rugs. And so the lady that was weaving made a mistake, and it was clearly a mistake. And the people that were watching, went, oh. And we're not happy with that. And she wasn't concerned at all, and she just kept weaving. And they watched, and so she was able to take what they viewed as a mistake, weave it in such a way that it added to the beauty. And see, that's what can happen if we keep our heads and keep our hearts, and we fly with courage, and we live with courage. And what looked alarming may be what makes it the most beautiful. Everything is part of a process, and the process is especially important. Aristotle said, "Time does not exist except for change." And I like that quote. And so time is all about change. It's not such a weird thing, change. And so that interested me this week, and I looked up the word change, and it's an old English word, and the word change means to become. So if you put all of that together, it means that time does not exist except for the becoming something new. Becoming something new. You're doing that right now, sitting there. You're becoming something new. You just did it again. You did it again. And so we're doing it all the time. And so it's not like stop and start. It's a process. It's a process. We used to have a spiritual community, and the name of the spiritual community was Journeys. And I named it Journeys. And I named it that because I thought, and I still do, that life is never about the destination. Life is always about the journey. It's always about the process. Sometimes we think the thing that matters most is the destination, is the ending. That's not right. The thing that matters most is the process of it, the destination. Nothing is more important than process, and the process is happening right now in you and in me. Principle 5. And I said this before, probably, but I'll say it again because I want to make clear that it's all connected. It's all connected. I said that you and I think in chunks, and we do. We jump from one conclusion to another. And we take change personally, as if someone chose us to do something to us, to harm us in some way. Neil deGrasse Tyson, you'd recognize him as the physicist that's often on television. He said, he's kind of a comic too. He said, the universe is under no obligation to make sense to you. And ain't that the truth? So, you and I want to, and I know this could be offensive to you if you're a deep metaphysician. So if so, I apologize, of course. But let me tell you the truth anyway, okay? And so the truth anyway is this. We want to be cautious about taking one tiny piece of life and snapping our meaning onto that as if we know what it means. Sometimes we take a piece of life, an event, and we name it something as if we know exactly what that means. And if we don't know that, we may go down to some place where we can find someone sitting at a table and we can give them $20 and they'll tell us what it means. And I'm going to suggest instead of doing any of that, again, rise up and take the big picture, because there's hundreds of events in your life, lots of situations in your life. And so I would encourage you and me to rise above those and let's see what themes we can find. Because then we don't need anyone else to tell us what my life means. But now I know what my life means because I can see the themes myself because I rise above them. And so we want to stop, in a sense, trying to make sense out of every single little piece of life. Because life is bigger than that. Life is more complex than that. And so think about your life like that. Think about your life in terms of the 5 principles I just talked about. And think of change like that. Change is all around us. And it doesn't mean you've done anything bad. It's not anything personal. It's not that the boogeyman is trying to mess you up or God is trying to punish you. Change happens. Change is happening all the time. It's just us becoming, us becoming, us becoming. And there's no stops and starts, just it all flows together. Life is really a fascinating thing. And if you do wonder, well, what does it mean? You get to decide. Only you can really decide. Don't let somebody else write your script. You decide what yours means. I'll decide what mine possibly could mean. I enjoy Hemingway. I haven't read Hemingway in a long time, but Olivia, who's 15, one of our daughters, she just read The Old Man and the Sea. So we were talking about that and the symbolism of how that related to Jesus in a way. But I've read Hemingway talking about hunting and bullfighting and war and all of those kind of things. Where I grew up, I saw lots of poverty. I remember I went to Jamaica once, and the people were appalled at the poverty. And it just seemed like home to me. Seriously. So I've seen lots of people in poverty. I've seen lots of people suffer. I've seen lots of people hurt. Hemingway said, "The world breaks every one. And afterward, many are strong at those broken places." Now that line is famous, and it's famous for good reason. And what sticks in most people's minds is the phrase, strong at broken places. But that's not what sticks in my mind. What sticks in my mind is the word many. It says many are strong at broken places, but not all. Just some. Just some. And that's because just because you're broken in a certain place doesn't necessarily make you stronger. It takes more than that. What does it take? It takes choice. Choice. It takes courage. It takes having a tool belt of things you could use, because it's like you're climbing a mountain and you can pull those things out and they can help. When I was just a little boy, my dad was in World War II. He was a sniper before there were snipers. And so he was a marksman. He was a marksman before he got there and improved once he arrived. And so he taught me to shoot as just a little boy. And we weren't hunting, we were shooting targets. And he taught me something called NPA. And some of you, a few of you might know what that is. NPA means natural point of aim. And so, and I'm telling you this for a reason. I'm not just giving a story. And so what that means is, if as a little boy I'm laying down and I have a rifle and I have a target and I'm aiming the rifle at that target. And I'm 7 years old, so I'm a little kid. And then I would make sure that it's on that target, and he would say, so it's centered right on the target, and I would say, yes, Daddy. And then he would say, so close your eyes now and take a deep breath and let it out, and close your eyes and let it out, and make sure you're really relaxed. And as you take this third breath and you breathe out, just really relax your entire body. And then slowly open your eyes. And now, is the sight on the target? No, Daddy, it's not. Well, is it to the left or is it to the right? And I would say it's to the left or it's to the right. And he would say, we want to find the natural point of aim. And so what that means, what some people would do is they would muscle the gun over. But he would be shooting, in the Army, he was shooting long distances. You wouldn't want to muscle it. You don't want to force it. You want to relax into it. So he would have me move my butt to the left or right, and then I'd go through the whole process again. Maybe after a couple times, I would open my eyes, and he would say, are you on the target? And I would say, yes. And he would say, that's your natural point of aim. It's a pretty cool thing. You could do that with a rifle. You can do it with a pistol. You can do it with anything like that if you're target shooting. So why would I tell you that? Because I want to tell you this, and this is the important part. Your life has a natural point of aim. Your life does. It's different than everybody around you. It's yours, and it's yours alone. And that means your life will fly in that direction. And your natural point of aim comes down to your habit, your practice. So when change happens, sometimes we get scared. And when we get scared, we fall into our habit, our practice. Now, I've heard people say this for a long time. People like to imagine, and they would say it like this. They would say, well, I imagine that I would rise to the occasion if such and such happened. And the problem with that is that rarely happens. People don't rise to the occasion normally. Not normally. What does happen is when life gets hard, when life gets stressful, when there's change, people get afraid and people sink to the level of their training. They sink to the level of their habit. They sink to the level of their practice. And that's why when change comes to you, and when it comes to me, I'm super excited about it. Because I think, this is going to be a new tool. This is going to teach me something that's going to help me improve my vision and help me see from a higher place. Because all of us want to add to our skills. Do you know what I mean? So you don't want to leave it to chance. You want to leave it to spiritual practice, spiritual habit. Just like my dad had me doing that as a little boy. He was trying to build up something inside of me. And the universe does exactly the same thing for us. And so we're always adding to our arsenal, because whether you know it or not, you are on the front lines of life. When you came into these physical bodies, you came into the leading edge, Abraham calls it. And so it means you're in for the ride. And so when change comes, all of it's just helping you equip your belt so you can climb the mountain, so you can fly. And so you can fly with courage. Let's turn within. I love the idea that all of us are living in cooperation with Spirit. Doesn't mean we always like what happens. But it means that most of the things that happen have a little note attached that says love. We are eternal, you and I. Our bodies are not eternal, but we are. And so our bodies change and relationships change, jobs change, but you are eternal. You're getting better and better and better. So you want to keep your eyes open. You want to build a strong practice, strong habit of getting the higher perspective. That's what we're here for. And that's the greatest thing that you could do for me, is see me choosing the higher perspective. And I promise I'll do the same for you. And I hope that we all do the same thing for each other, because that's what we're here for. That's what we're here for. And so with great joy, we as a community say together, and so it is. Thank you very much.